The year was 2023, and every Tuesday morning at exactly 10:15, the glass door of Ray's Diner on Highway 29 outside Austin, Texas, swung open and three men in perfectly pressed suits walked in like they owned the place. The leader was Davidson Mitchell, 56 years old, silver hair slicked back, Rolex catching the light every time he pointed. Behind him came Brett, his accountant, always clutching a leather briefcase like it was glued to his hand, and Ryan, the youngest, the loudest laugher, the one who filmed everything on his phone for the group chat. They always took booth number 8, the big corner one by the window, and the moment they sat down, the temperature in the diner dropped 10 degrees, because everyone knew what was coming. At the counter stood Kesha Johnson, 34 years old, white waitress uniform, spotless, black non-slip shoes polished every night. Her hands move with the kind of steady grace that only comes from years of handling trauma kits under gunfire. But nobody in that diner knew that. All they saw were the scars. They started at her fingertips, thick, rope-like burns that crawled up both arms, curled around her neck, and covered most of her face. 43% of her body. The doctors had said 43% that had once been on fire. Some mornings she wore light makeup to soften the edges, but most days she didn't bother. The scars were part of her now, the way the Texas heat was part of the air. The first Tuesday it happened, nobody thought much of it. Davidson slammed his hand on the table hard enough to make the silverware jump. "Hey, Freddy Krueger's working today. Monster, 3 black coffees, and don't drip any of that melted skin in mine." The whole booth erupted in laughter. A couple of truckers at the counter glanced over, then looked away. The old lady who always ordered oatmeal pretended to be very interested in her newspaper. Kesha walked over with the coffee pot steady in her hands. She poured 3 cups without spilling a drop, placed the cream exactly in the middle of the table, and asked in a voice so calm it was almost musical, "Anything else, gentlemen?" Davidson leaned back, smirking. "Yeah, an explanation. How'd you get all that? Boyfriend pour acid on you? Ghetto fire? Or were you just born unlucky?" For one single heartbeat, something flickered behind Kesha's eyes. Not anger, not shame. Something colder, something patient. But Davidson missed it. He was too busy admiring his own cruelty. Kesha simply said, "Work," turned and walked away. Brett snickered loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "Work? What kind of work leaves you looking like barbecue gone wrong? Nightclub bouncer? Crack lab explosion?" More laughter. Kesha kept walking, hips steady, shoulders square, the way soldiers walk when they're carrying something heavier than their own body weight. Across the diner, an older man in a faded army ball cap watched the whole thing. His name was James Wright, 47 years old, retired first sergeant, 2 tours in Afghanistan. He had come in for a quiet cup of coffee on his cross-country motorcycle trip. Instead, he got a front-row seat to something that made his stomach turn. He noticed little things the others missed. The way Kesha's weight shifted perfectly balanced on the balls of her feet. The way her eyes constantly scanned exits and hands. The way she placed the coffee pot back on the burner with the handle turned exactly 45 degrees for fastest grip. Little things only another soldier would recognize. But he stayed quiet. For now, back at booth 8, Davidson wasn't finished. "Seriously, though," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "I bet she was a prostitute who got burned by a John. You know how it is in those neighborhoods." Ryan nearly choked on his coffee laughing. Kesha was wiping down table 6, close enough to hear every word. She never looked up, never changed expression, just kept wiping in slow, perfect circles. Inside her apron pocket, a tiny red light blinked on the $19 digital voice recorder she had bought at Walmart the night before. It had been recording for 12 minutes already. She had decided, right then and there, that if these men wanted to treat her like she was invisible, she would use that invisibility the same way she once used darkness on night patrols. Let them talk. Let them dig. She would wait, because Kesha Johnson had already survived fire once. She knew exactly how long a man could scream before the flames finally won, and she had learned something the burn war that these men would never understand. Pain either breaks you or it teaches you patience. Davidson leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice dripping with fake concern. Come on, sweetheart. Tell us the story. We're all friends here. Was it an accident? Or did somebody teach you a lesson you know a lesson? He emphasized the last two words the way only a certain kind of man does when he thinks he's untouchable. Kesha turned slowly. For the first time that morning, she looked Davidson Mitchell directly in the eyes. Some stories, she said, voice soft but carrying to every corner of the diner, are more dangerous to tell than you can possibly imagine. Then she smiled, just a tiny curve at the corner of her mouth, and walked away. Davidson laughed again, but this time it sounded a little thinner. Across the room, James Wright felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He had seen that exact smile before on the faces of soldiers who had already made peace with whatever came next. He paid his check, left a $20 tip on a $4 coffee, and decided he would be back next Tuesday, because something told him the story was only getting started. And Kesha? She finished her shift at 10 that night, drove her 15-year-old Honda to the tiny apartment she rented above a laundromat, sat down at her kitchen table, and listened to the entire recording twice. Then she opened a blank notebook and wrote, in perfect block letters, Tuesday number 1, Davidson Mitchell, Mitchell and Associates, Booth 8, 10:17 a.m. to 12:03 p.m. Topics: racist firing tactics, cash payments, Stevens Industries contract. She closed a notebook, placed it in a fireproof box under her bed next to her dress blues and her medals, and went to sleep without dreaming, because soldiers who have already been through hell don't waste time on nightmares. They plan. And Kesha Johnson had just begun a very long, very patient plan. Next Tuesday, she would be back at Booth 8 at 10:15 sharp, with the recorder running. And a plan 6 months in the making had only just begun. The second Tuesday came exactly 7 days later. Davidson, Brett, and Ryan walked in at 10:15 on the dot. Same booth, same arrogant swagger. They didn't even notice that Kesha was already standing by the coffee station with the pot in her hand, ready, waiting like a sniper who had already ranged the target. Davidson didn't bother with hello, monster, coffee, and make it quick. Some of us have real companies to run. Brett was already laughing before the words were fully out. Ryan had his phone up, filming vertically like always. Kesha walked over, poured 3 cups perfectly, and stood there for half a second longer than usual. Davidson squinted. What? You finally gonna cry today? Kesha looked at him with those calm, unblinking eyes. No, sir. Just making sure I remember your faces. Then she walked away. Davidson barked a laugh. Hear that, boys? The burn victim's getting mouthy. Maybe we should complain to management. Brett leaned in, voice low but still loud enough for half the diner to hear. Careful, Davidson. She might put a hex on us with those witch hands. They all roared. Kesha never turned around. The little red light in her apron pocket kept blinking. That day they stayed 2 full hours. They always stayed 2 hours on Tuesdays. It was their strategy breakfast. They talked numbers, contracts, golf handicaps, and, of course, how to fire people without getting sued. Davidson bragged about a new client, Carter Logistics. 42 warehouse workers, 28 of them black or Hispanic. Owner wants a floor looking a certain way for the investors. I told him $200,000 in 30 days. I'll make it happen. No paper trail, no problem. Brett asked, same playbook? Same playbook, Davidson grinned. Start with the oldest ones. Call it reduction in force. Then the ones with any write-up in the last 5 years. Then we invent write-ups for the rest. By the time they figure out, they're gone and we're paid. Ryan raised his coffee cup like it was champagne. To cleaning house. Kesha refilled their cups twice without being asked. Each time she leaned in just close enough for the recorder to catch every syllable. When they finally left, Davidson threw a $5 bill on a $40 tab and said loud enough for the whole diner, "Keep the change, beauty. Buy yourself a mask." The door swung shut behind them. Kesha picked up the $5, folded it once, and slipped it into the tip jar for Maria, the single mom who worked the night shift. Then she went to the back, clocked out, and drove home. Same routine. Same kitchen table. Same headphones. She listened to the entire 2 hours again. Transcribed every name, every dollar amount, every racist joke. Added it to the growing file labeled Tuesdays. By the end of month 2, she had 8 recordings. By the end of month 4, 16. 16 Tuesdays of poison. And still, nobody in the diner ever stood up. Not the truckers. Not the regulars. Not even Tony, the manager, who would hide in the kitchen the moment he heard Davidson's voice. Only one person kept coming back every single week now. James Wright, the retired first sergeant with the army cap. He always took the same stool at the far end of the counter, ordered black coffee, left a $10 tip, never said much, but he watched, and he saw the pattern. He saw how Kesha's eyes changed a little more each week, how the smile never reached them anymore, how she moved like someone counting down to something only she could see. On the 20th Tuesday, something new happened. Davidson was in a particularly foul mood. He had just lost a big contract because the company got scared of optics after the George Floyd protests. He took it out on Kesha II. He sat down. He waited until she was close, then knocked his full coffee cup off the table on purpose. It shattered. Hot coffee splashed across the floor and onto her shoes. "Oops," he said, grinning. "Clumsy me. Clean that up, would you, monster?" The diner went dead silent. Kesha stood there for 3 full seconds, looking at the broken pieces, the spreading coffee, the smirks on their faces. Then she did something nobody expected. She smiled. A real one this time. "Don't worry, sir," she said softly. "I'm very good at cleaning up messes men like you make." She got the mop, cleaned it perfectly, and went back to work. James Wright watched the whole thing with his jaw clenched so tight his teeth hurt. When Kesha walked past him to get more coffee filters, he spoke for the first time. "Whatever you're doing, sister, I hope it's big." Kesha paused, looked him dead in the eye, and answered just as quietly, "It's going to be biblical." That night, she added a new page to her notebook. Tuesday, number 20. Spilled coffee on purpose. No reaction given. Phase 2 begins next week. She opened a second fireproof box. Inside were printed emails, company org charts, news articles, and a list of every client Davidson had ever named. She was no longer just collecting evidence. She was building a kill chain, and the target had no idea the crosshairs were already locked. Outside, the Texas heat baked the asphalt. Cicadas screamed in the trees, and the highway roared with trucks that never stopped. Inside Kesha's tiny apartment, the only sound was a quiet click of a mouse as she saved another file, backed it up to 3 different cloud accounts, and labeled it carefully. Tuesday, number 20, full. For more Tuesdays to go. For more chances for Davidson Mitchell to keep digging the grave he thought he was forcing her into. Because the thing about fire is this: it doesn't just destroy. Sometimes it forges. And Kesha Johnson had been forged in a hotter fire than any of these men could ever imagine. She closed the laptop, turned off the light, and went to sleep. No nightmares. Just dreams of the day the hammer would finally fall. And it was coming, sooner than they thought. The 23rd Tuesday dawned hotter than usual. The Texas sun was already brutal at 9 in the morning, and the diner's old air conditioning unit wheezed like a dying animal. Kesha arrived at 5:45 a.m. Same as always. She unlocked the door, turned on the coffee machines, wiped down every table twice, and set out the sugar shakers in perfect rows. Then she did something she had never done before. She took the little chalkboard that usually read, "Today's special, chicken fried steak," and wrote something new in careful, steady letters. "Today's special, justice. Served cold, extra strong." Tony, the manager, saw it when he came in at 6:30. He opened his mouth to say something, looked at Kesha's face, and closed it again. Some things you just don't argue with. At 10:15 exactly, the door opened and the 3 suits walked in. Davidson looked irritated before he even sat down. He had gained weight since the first Tuesday. His face was redder. His tie was loosened. Business wasn't going as well as he pretended. They slid into booth 8. Davidson didn't even look up. "Monster. Coffee. And tell the cook I want my eggs over easy, not burnt like your damn face. Brett and Ryan laughed on cue. Kesha walked over with the pot. She poured 3 cups without a word. Then she did something new. She left a small white envelope in the center of the table. Davidson frowned. What the hell is this? Kesha's voice was softer than ever. An invitation, sir, for next Tuesday. Same time. Booth 8. I took the liberty of reserving it permanently. Davidson ripped the envelope open. Inside was a single card. Thick cream stock. Simple black lettering. You are cordially invited to the last Tuesday you will ever spend in this diner. He looked up, confused and angry. What kind of joke is this? Kesha smiled the smallest, coldest smile anyone had ever seen. No joke, Mr. Mitchell. Just good manners. Then she walked away. Ryan started laughing nervously. She's finally lost it. Davidson crumpled the card and threw it on the floor. Ignore the freak. Let's talk about the Delta Freight account. For the next hour and 43 minutes, they talked freely, loudly, carelessly, the way men do when they believe no one important is listening. They talked about how Delta Freight wanted to replace the night shift because those people were stealing too much. They talked about routing the payments through a fake training company in the Caymans. They talked about how the owner's son wanted photos of the before and after workforce for the board. Kesha refilled coffee 4 times. Each time she leaned in just enough of the recorder to catch every word perfectly. When they finally stood up to leave, Davidson kicked the crumpled invitation across the floor and said, "See you next week, monster. Try not to scare the children." The door slammed behind them. James Wright, sitting in his usual spot, watched Kesha pick up the crumpled card, smooth it out carefully, and slide it into her apron pocket like it was made of gold. He leaned over the counter and spoke low. "Next Tuesday is the day, isn't it?" Kesha met his eyes. "Yes, First Sergeant. Next Tuesday the war ends." James nodded once. "I'll be here. Front row." That night, Kesha's apartment, that night was different. The kitchen table was no longer enough. She had pushed the couch against the wall and turned the entire living room into a command center. 3 laptops open, 2 external hard drives blinking, a whiteboard covered in names, dates, dollar amounts, and red arrows connecting everything like a battle map. 25 Tuesdays' worth of recordings have been edited into a single master file. 51 hours, 12 minutes, 47 seconds of Davidson Mitchell confessing to felony discrimination, wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. She had separated it into folders. Stevens Industries, SCARTA, Logistics, Delta Freight 11, other companies' cash, paymenters' statements, threats against employees. Every file was time-stamped, backed up in 4 separate cloud accounts, and also saved to 3 encrypted thumb drives hidden in different locations. She had written a cover letter, 23 pages long, addressed to U.S. Department of Labor, Wage and Hour Division, Equal Employment Opportunity Commissioners, Criminal Investigation Division, Texas Attorney, General FBI, Public Corruption Unit, every major news station from Dallas to Houston to New York. The letter ended with a single line. Respect should be automatic. When it isn't, sometimes the invisible have to make themselves seen. At 3:17 a.m., she scheduled every email to send at exactly 8 a.m. the following Tuesday, 6 days away. Then she did one last thing. She opened the fireproof box under her bed, took out her dress blue uniform that she hadn't worn in 8 years, and laid it carefully on the chair. The medals glinted in the streetlight, coming through the blinds. Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, Army Commendation Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters, Iraq Campaign Medal, Combat Medical Badge. She touched the Bronze Star once, gently, like greeting an old friend. Then she whispered to the empty room, "One more mission." The final Tuesday arrived. Kesha woke up at 4 a.m. She showered, put on fresh bandages where the scars still hurt in cold weather, and dressed in her regular white uniform. But underneath the uniform, against her skin, she wore something no one would see until the moment was right. Her combat medical badge pin, sharp and ready. At 9:55 a.m., she stood in the diner kitchen and spoke to Tony. "Today I'm going to need the floor at 10:30. Can you clear the counter seats for veterans only?" Tony, pale and sweating, just nodded. He had seen the look in her eyes before, back when his own cousin came home from Fallujah. At 10:15, the door opened. Davidson, Brett, and Ryan walked in laughing, already halfway through a story about a strip club in Houston. They stopped dead when they saw the diner. Every stool at the counter was occupied by men and women in veteran ball caps, motorcycle vests, old unit shirts. At least 20 of them. All silent, all watching. James Wright sat in the middle, arms crossed, eyes hard. Davidson recovered first. What the hell is this, Halloween? Kesha stepped out from behind the counter, carrying the coffee pot like it was a rifle. Good morning, gentlemen. Your booth is ready. She led them to booth 8. The chalkboard now read, "Today's special, consequences. Serve with receipts." Davidson sat down slowly. "You're fired after this. You know that, right?" Kesha smiled. "We'll see." She poured the coffee. Then she placed her phone in the center of the table, face up, recording light red and blinking. Davidson's eyes narrowed. "Turn that off." "No, sir," Kesha said politely. "Today I'm the one asking questions." And for the first time in 6 months, the diner was completely, perfectly silent. Outside, the Texas sun burned down. Inside, the temperature felt like it had dropped to freezing, because every person in that room knew, without a word being spoken, that the war Kesha Johnson had been fighting alone for half a year was about to end in the next 10 minutes. And not one of them was going to miss it. The clock above the grill read 10:27 a.m. 25 veterans sat like statues along the counter. James Wright's eyes never left booth 8. Tony stood by the kitchen door, arms folded, ready to lock it if anyone tried to run. Kesha Johnson stood at the end of the booth, coffee pot still in her left hand, phone recording in the center of the table. Davidson tried to laugh, but it came out dry. "All right, freak show's over. Turn that phone off and get back to work before I have you arrested for whatever this is." Kesha didn't move. "Mr. Davidson Mitchell," she began, voice soft but carrying to every corner of the diner. "For the last 6 months you have come here every Tuesday, sat in this exact booth, and called me monster, Freddy Krueger, burn victim, acid face, ghetto trash, and worse. You have done it loud enough for every customer to hear. You have done it while my recorder was running." She tapped the phone. "Today is Tuesday number 26. That is 52 hours and 14 minutes of you speaking freely, because you believe a scarred waitress was too stupid, too broken, and too invisible to ever fight back." Brett shifted nervously. "This is harassment. We're leaving." He started to stand. James Wright's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Sit down." Brett sat. Kesha continued. "At 8 a.m. this morning, 52 hours of audio, broken into individual felony confessions, were emailed simultaneously to the United States Department of Labor, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the IRS, Criminal Investigation Division, the FBI Field Office in Austin, the Texas Attorney General of Texas, every television station and newspaper from here to Washington. DCN, every single client you have ever named in this booth." She let that sink in for 3 full heartbeats. Davidson's face went the color of old paper. "You're lying." Kesha turned the phone around so they could see the screen. A long list of green check marks. "Delivery confirmed, DOJ. Delivery confirmed, IRSCI. Delivery confirmed, CBS News. Delivery confirmed, Michael Stevens, CEO, Stevens Industries." Davidson's hand shot out to grab the phone. James was there in 2 steps, hand like a vice on Davidson's wrist. "I wouldn't," James said quietly. Kesha pressed play on the first clip. Davidson's own voice filled the diner, loud and clear. "The trick is never put race on paper. Just document cultural fit, issues, tardiness, anything. That's how you remove an entire minority department without a single discrimination claim ever sticking." Another clip. "Stevens paid $2 million cash last year. Told me, make the warehouse great again. 15 black employees gone in 30 days. Not one lawsuit." Another clip. "Delta Freight wants the night shift replaced. Owner's son says investors don't like the look of the current crew. We'll route the money through the Cayman's account like always." Every clip was time-stamped. Every clip was in context. Every clip was devastating. Davidson's mouth opened, and closed like a fish on dry land. Kesha wasn't finished. She reached down slowly and unbuttoned her right sleeve. The diner had never been this quiet. She rolled the sleeve all the way to the shoulder. There it was, faded but unmistakable. The proud red one of the 1st Infantry Division, the big red one. And beneath it the tiny bronze V device that only comes with a bronze star for valor. A collective intake of breath moved through the veterans at the counter. Kesha spoke again, still calm. Sergeant Kesha Johnson, U.S. Army Combat Trauma Specialist. 3 tours, Iraq. 43 lives saved. 43% of my body burned saving them. I have carried dying brothers through fire while my own skin melted. I have held pressure on arteries with my bare hands while bullets snapped overhead. I have been decorated by generals and thanked by presidents. And for 6 months you call me monster. She let the sleeve fall back down. Davidson tried one last time. This is blackmail. You can't. It's not blackmail, Kesha said. It's consequences. Her phone started vibrating on the table. Call after call. She put the first one on speaker. Mitchell, it's Michael Stevens. Every contract with Mitchell and Associates is terminated effective immediately. Expect service of lawsuit within the hour. Do not ever call this number again. Click. Second call. Davidson, Carter Logistics here. We're out. Lawyers are already drafting. Click. Third call. Davidson's wife, screaming so loud everyone heard. The video Brett posted is at 8 million views. I've filed for divorce. The bank just froze our accounts. Davidson stared at the phone like it was a loaded gun. Kesha looked him straight in the eyes. You wanted the world to see my face. Now the world is going to see yours. She turned to Brett, who was trying to shrink into the booth. Brett, your accounting license will be revoked by next week. The IRS has your gym bag cash deposits flagged as structuring. That's 15 years minimum. Then to Ryan. Ryan, the video you posted this morning for laughs, it now has your full name, your LinkedIn, and your mother's Facebook in the description. Good luck getting another job. Finally, she looked back at Davidson. You asked me once how I got my scars. I told you work. You laughed. Today you're going to learn exactly what kind of work it was. She reached into her apron and pulled out a small remote. With one press, the diner's old television above the counter flickered to life. Every news channel was running the same breaking alert. Texas consulting firm implicated in massive discrimination scheme. Audio evidence released by decorated Army veteran Waitress. Davidson's company logo filled the screen, followed by a smiling headshot from the website. The ticker underneath read, multiple federal investigations launched. Clients fleeing. CEO Davidson Mitchell named. Davidson lunged out of the booth, face purple. You crazy bitch, you've ruined me. Kesha didn't flinch. James Wright and 3 other veterans stepped forward, forming a wall. Kesha spoke over them, voice still soft, still steady. No, sir, you ruined yourself. I just held the mirror. She reached under the counter and pulled out a small framed photograph, her official Army portrait in dress blues, medals gleaming, and placed it on the table in front of him. This is who you mocked for 26 weeks. Remember her face. You're going to be seeing it for the rest of your life. Davidson's knees buckled. He had to grab the table to stay standing. Kesha turned to the room full of veterans and customers who had watched in silence for half a year. And to everyone who sat here and did nothing, I forgive you, but I hope today you learned something. Then she looked back at the 3 men who were no longer laughing. Gentlemen, your coffee is on the house today. There will be no next Tuesday. She picked up the coffee pot, turned, and walked toward the kitchen. Behind her, Davidson slid down the booth seat until he was sitting on the floor, head in his hands. The veterans at the counter began to clap. Slow, steady, the sound of respect earned in blood and fire. Outside, news vans were already pulling into the parking lot. Inside, Kesha Johnson disappeared through the swinging kitchen door. The war was over, and she had won it without ever raising her voice. The kitchen door swung shut behind Kesha, and for the first time in 6 months, she let herself breathe. Just one long, shaky breath. Tony was standing there, eyes wet. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. He just opened his arms. Kesha stepped into the hug like a daughter coming home from war all over again. Outside, the diner had become something else entirely. News helicopters thumped overhead. Cameras flashed through the windows. Reporters shouted questions at anyone who stepped outside. The parking lot filled with pickup trucks flying American flags and Palmaye banners. Veterans kept arriving from 3 states away, just to stand in that gravel lot and salute the door she had walked through. Inside booth 8, Davidson Mitchell sat on the floor, tie undone, $1,000 shoe scuffed, staring at nothing. Brett was crying quietly. Ryan kept muttering, "It was just jokes. It was just jokes." James Wright stood over them like a sentinel. "Get up," he said. "Walk out with whatever dignity you have left. Because if you make her come back out here, I promise you won't like what happens next." They got up. They walked out past 20 silent veterans who didn't budge an inch. Outside, the cameras caught every second of their walk of shame. By nightfall, the story was everywhere. CNN, Fox, NBC, BBC, every channel led with the same photograph. Kesha in dress blues, scars visible but proud, medals shining, standing next to the American flag. The headlines scrolled across the bottom of the screen in every language. Decorated Army sergeant records 6 months of racist abuse, exposes multi-million-dollar discrimination ring, destroys company with nothing but patience and a $19 recorder. The diner never reopened that day. Instead, it became holy ground. Veterans stood in line for hours just to touch the counter where she had stood. Someone left a folded flag. Someone else left a bronze Star Challenge coin. By midnight, there were flowers, candles, handwritten letters from strangers who had never met her but felt like they owed her their lives. 3 days later, the federal raids began. FBI agents and windbreakers walked into 14 companies across Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma. Hard drives were seized. CEOs were let out in handcuffs. The U.S. attorney held a press conference and said the words "largest workplace discrimination conspiracy in a generation." Mitchell and Associates was gone before the week was out. The website went dark. The phones were disconnected. The office furniture was auctioned off for pennies. Davidson Mitchell lost everything. House foreclosed. Cars repossessed. Wife gone. Children wouldn't take his calls. He was last seen driving a 10-year-old Corolla for a rideshare app at 2 a.m., wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low, praying nobody recognized him. Brett turned state's evidence and still got 8 years. Ryan's teaching certificate, he had been a substitute coach on the side, was revoked for moral turpitude. Kesha never pressed charges for harassment. She didn't need to. The universe had already done it for her. Ray's Diner never looked the same again. Tony closed it for 2 weeks, repainted, and reopened it as Kesha's Place, Home of Heroes. The entire back wall is now the Wall of Heroes. Hundreds of photographs, men and women in uniform, some scarred, some missing limbs, all smiling. Kesha's official Army portrait hangs in the center, life-size, medals gleaming under soft lights. She still works the occasional shift, not because she has to book deals, speaking tours, and nonprofit foundations pay her more in a month than the diner did in a year, but because she wants people to see her scars up close and remember. On the 1-year anniversary, a general flew in from the Pentagon. In front of cameras and 500 veterans, he pinned the soldier's medal on her chest, the highest award for heroism not involving combat with an enemy, for courageously exposing corruption at enormous personal risk. She accepted it with the same quiet, "Thank you, sir," she once used in the burn ward. James Wright moved to town permanently. He and Kesha started a nonprofit that helps veterans transition to civilian life and fights workplace discrimination. They call it the Quiet Professionals. Every Tuesday at 10:15 a.m., the diner still reserves booth 8, but now it has a bronze plaque on the table, reserved in perpetuity. For anyone who needs to remember, that respect is not earned by medals. It is owed to every human soul. No one ever sits there unless they are a scarred veteran or a kid who wants to learn what real strength looks like. Davidson Mitchell tried to reach her once. He called from a block number, voice shaking, begging forgiveness, offering money, anything. Kesha listened for 10 silent seconds, then spoke the only words she ever gave him after that day. Some lessons have to be permanent, Mr. Mitchell. Live with it. And hung up. Today, if you drive down Highway 290 and pull into Kesha's place, you'll still find her there some mornings, pouring coffee with steady hands, scars on full display. Children ask to touch them. She lets them, then she tells them gently, these aren't ugly. These are the places where the fire tried to get in and couldn't. Old men cry at the counter and thank her for giving them back their pride. Young women going into the military take selfies with her and say they enlisted because of her story. And every now and then, a man in a cheap suit walks in, looks at the wall of heroes, reads the plaque on booth 8, and leaves without ordering. Because some ghosts never leave you. Kesha's scars never faded, but the world's view of them did. They are no longer marks of shame. They are maps of courage. Proof that the hottest fire doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it forges the strongest steel. And if you ask her today what the hardest part was, she will think for a long moment and answer the same way every time. The hardest part wasn't the fire in Iraq. It wasn't the 6 months of hate. The hardest part was staying quiet long enough for justice to grow louder than the hate. Then she will smile that small, calm smile you now know so well, pour you a cup of coffee, and say, but I learned something in the burn ward that stayed with me. When the world tries to burn you down, you don't have to burn back. You just have to outlast the flames and wait for them to burn themselves out. So if you ever find yourself in Texas, drive down Highway 290. Stop at Kesha's place. Order the chicken fried steak. Leave the biggest tip you can afford. And when the woman with the scars and the steady hands brings your plate, look her in the eyes and say the only 2 words that matter. Thank you. Because some heroes don't wear capes. Some wear aprons. Some carry trays instead of rifles. And some win wars with nothing more than patience, a $19 recorder, and a heart that refused to break. This is the story of Sergeant Kesha Johnson, a quiet woman who proved, once and for all, that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one who never raises their voice, until the whole world is finally ready to listen. Thank you for walking this journey with her. May we all learn to see the hero before we ever see the scars. God bless our veterans. God bless the quiet ones. And God bless Kesha Johnson, the waitress who brought an empire to its knees, with nothing but the truth and 6 months of perfect, unbreakable silence.